Chinese audience would go to see an American film.
From TV to movie to reality to
From Wanda Group and Alibaba.
怎么样在竞争中去生存
creative team to China.
And there's that strong anchor to China.
Hello everybody, I am Romy. Welcome to Hollywood Meet China, the private meeting with people who work both in China and the Hollywood entertainment industry. Today we are really glad to have with us Robert Cain, a producer, a Chinese film industry specialist and consultant. Robert, you worked for more than 25 years in the Hollywood entertainment industry,
That's right.
Primarily as a production, finance, strategy, and creative development specialist. How did you end up creating the blog China Film Biz, and what is your personal connection with China?
Well, China Film Biz is an interesting story. I was here in LA. I was working in Chinese entertainment, going back and forth, doing projects there, and found that I needed more information about the market. There really was a lot of questions that I had, and I knew other people had. So I went looking online, and there was nothing. There was really no information. There was one website I found that was about the history of Chinese communist movies in the 1950s or something like that. And so I saw that there was a big hole. And I knew if I was looking for information, I was sure that other people would be looking too. So I decided to fill that hole and just started writing.
Yeah.
At first, it was just kind of for fun and to kind of put my name out there also in the community as someone who knew a lot about China. And I started doing research and talking to people and interviewing people. And before I knew it, it became really a regular thing where I was writing a few articles every week. And I would have people calling me and asking about the Chinese industry. And then I set up my website, and so China Film Biz was really born.
And how many years has the website?
Well, I started that in 2011, and then I was writing pretty regularly for that until about the middle of 2015, about 2 years ago. And I didn't really want to do any advertising. I wasn't doing it to make money. I did actually make some money in other ways where people would come to me and ask me to work on projects with them. But a few different magazines had approached me and asked me if I would write for them. And I kept saying no. And then Forbes magazine approached me a few times. They were very persistent. And so I finally said, okay, if I'm doing this anyway, maybe they would pay me some money and I would have a bigger audience also. That was the thing that was most attractive to me.
So you did a partnership with this magazine, or?
So yeah, I'm a contributing writer to Forbes, and I've continued, and I still write a lot.
Oh, okay.
But
as a Chinese film industry specialist.
Chinese film industry, and then I also branched out into other areas of Asia. So mostly I write a lot about China and about India.
And what is your background as a producer? Because you produce too, so you are in both sides of the industry.
Yes, producing was something I wanted to do when I first came here to Los Angeles. And I didn't really know anything about it and hardly knew anyone in the industry. But I came from getting my MBA degree and just decided to start out and learn about the business. I worked for a few different studios and for some of the talent guilds, like the Screen Actors Guild, for instance, and just got to know people over the years and got involved in helping to finance movies and saw all the different aspects over the years. And so finally, at a certain point, I felt like I was ready. And so I got involved in producing myself in my first movies.
Great. And so you do both? You produce at the same time and you write some articles about Chinese film industry?
Yes, I usually start writing at about 10 or 11 at night, and then I have long days, and so and then I get up and work on the producing starting in the morning.
Okay, great. And how did you build your relationship with Chinese collaborators? Because if you have to write about Chinese film industry, you have to be in touch with these persons.
It's true. It really helps me that I have a good network of contacts and friends and business associates in China. And like anything, it's all about relationships. I was fortunate that I lived in China for the first time many years ago, over 25 years ago. And at that time, I made it my, just made an effort to meet as many people as I could. And I stayed in touch with them. And I've been lucky, quite a few of them have done very well. They've either become some very successful in film or very wealthy in other ways. And so now, and I've had some success of my own, so we're able to help each other at a pretty high level. And then I travel there a lot. So I'm usually there in China 3 or 4 times a year now.
Wow.
And always plan when I'm there to meet, everybody I possibly can. Of my old connections and try to meet new people. So it's a big effort, networking and, and staying in touch with people.
And how many years did you live there in China?
I was in Shanghai on a picture. It was a little bit less than a year. I lived in Hong Kong for about a year. And then I was in Taipei in Taiwan also for a while, very separate from China, but it was also a good experience for me to learn a little bit. I didn't really do any movie business there. But so all together, a couple of years.
And with your experiences, what do you think are the major differences between US and China production processes?
Oh, the production processes are, they're very different.
Yeah.
In China, usually I find things happen more quickly. So people will decide they want to do a project. They'll put together a crew. They'll often start with a script that is written more quickly, so it's more of a faster pace, I think. Here in the U.S., you tend to have more lawyers involved, more sort of bureaucracy. It's just part of the system, part of the way things work here. So it takes a little more time. But the advantage of the Chinese system is you can start a project and have a finished movie pretty quickly. The advantage here is that you really do get to take the time and the care to do things, hopefully, as well as you can.
Could you tell us more about the specific project you did in China or in India, for example?
Yes, why don't I start with the first project where I was involved in production. And this was about the year 2000, I think it was. And I was asked to help out CCTV, the big Chinese TV network, in putting together a production that they were doing, and then in helping them to sell it and deliver it to buyers around the world. The production I was very lucky, it was a really exciting one. It was an opera performance by a group called the Three Tenors, 3 very famous Italian and Spanish opera singers, some of the most famous in the world. And they did a concert inside the Forbidden City. It was just a beautiful place to do it. It was shot at night. They lit it really beautifully. And my role, as I say, was I helped them they knew how to do TV production, of course, but they hadn't really delivered a big program like this to buyers around the world. And they didn't really know what was involved in that. So I was there. I got there a couple of weeks early and helped them set up. I was there for the production. And then a big part of my role was really distributing the project internationally. So I sold it in North America and South America and Europe.
So you was a international sales agent for this program?
I would say a consulting producer on the television production, and then also acted as a sales agent.
Wow.
On that. Yes.
So you traveled a lot for...
And yes, I did some travel around in Europe and in the United States to get that deal done.
That's really exciting.
And then, another one I think that's worth mentioning, interestingly, it shot mostly in China and also Mongolia, but it was developed when I was living in Russia. And it was this film called Mongol, which was about the early life of Genghis Khan. And as it turned out, we shot quite a lot of the film in China. So there I developed the project. I helped oversee with the writer, the creation of the script. I raised financing. I hired crew and oversaw from the production office, which was in Moscow, the early stages of the production of the film.
So you had a company in Moscow, or you was an independent producer?
I was running at the time, I was running a production company in Moscow for some investors.
Wow. What do you think about the potential for Chinese movies in Hollywood? That's your topic. And how do you explain the increasing US-China co-productions in Hollywood too?
Okay, so two questions. Chinese films have, when they're imported to the United States, every once in a while there's one that finds a big, wide audience. It doesn't happen very often. I would say every 5 or 10 years we'll have a Chinese language film that does really well in the United States. Mostly the way that Chinese films are distributed here, they go to theaters that have screens reserved for Chinese audiences, and mostly the audiences who go to see them are Chinese language speakers. So that's a pretty good business in the United States, and it's grown over the recent years, but it's still pretty small.
Because you mean about Chinese movies in Chinese language?
Yes.
You speak about. And what about the co-production? I mean, US-China co-production.
Co-production.
Movies in English?
In English, there hasn't really been very much. There have been a few films that have been attempted. There was The Karate Kid, which was a co-production between China Film Group and an American production company. That was with Will Smith's son, and Will Smith was one of the producers. Jackie Chan. It shot in mostly around Beijing, and it did pretty well internationally, but for a lot of reasons it didn't really do very well in China. The audiences didn't really turn out for it. And then more recently, last year, there was a film called The Great Wall, which was done in both in English, mostly in English, and in Chinese, shot in China, big budget. Matt Damon was the star. And unfortunately, that one didn't do a lot of business either. So it's pretty challenging to find a way to make a movie that is successful for the Chinese audience and then also for the US and international audience. And I would say nobody's really figured out the formula yet.
Audience, no. And about the Indian movies? Is that...
So Indian movies, yeah, I've been been involved in India for quite a while. I have some business that I do there. And currently my focus is more on a few productions I'm working on there. There was a film called Bahubali, which was a giant hit, and one of the stars of that movie has a close association with my partners. So we're hiring him to do a film and probably several films. And then what's also been interesting about India is their exporting of their films has become more important. And there's an Indian film called Dangal with the Indian film star Amir Khan that has been playing in China and just making enormous amounts of money. Very popular film about a father who teaches his daughters to become championship wrestlers. And it's going to end up doing close to $200 million in box office in China alone. So a lot of people are looking at that film and other Indian films that have done well in China and thinking about what the opportunities are. Maybe there are some co-production opportunities there. They do have a treaty, and they have, although they're very different places, very different countries, they have some cultural elements in common.
India and China?
India and China.
Okay.
So the reason this movie Dangal, I think, worked so well was it was about young girls in a rural village really making it in the bigger world. It was about family relationships and education, and a lot of the same sort of themes that Chinese audiences appreciate too.
Yeah. Okay, great. Can you tell us something about your future projects, and how do you feel about the future of the entertainment industry in both China and the US co-production?
So yeah, I mentioned this Indian project that I'm developing now. I've got one that is being set up in China. It's actually a remake of an English language film that we shot here in New Orleans. It's a mystery thriller with some horror in it. And what my partner and I, who produced that, did was we found a Chinese investor who's very interested in the story. And so we've written a version of the script to be shot in China in Chinese. And we're setting that up and expecting that we'll get started shooting on that in the fall. Then I've got also one that I wrote myself that takes place mostly in Russia. And that's an astronaut story about the first man into space, Yuri Gagarin. So that's also one that I'm raising money for now.
And it's going to be in English, of course.
Yes, we'll shoot in English.
And not a China-US co-production?
That's not.
No, American film.
Yeah, I'm not really working on anything that would be an official co-production. It's hard to get those done. The rules in China are pretty difficult to meet, the requirements there. And as I said, it's also, if you're going to do a co-production, you really need to figure out how to tell a story that will work for both markets. So that's a challenge that I'm not really focusing on right now. The movies I'm doing in China are for China, and the ones I'm doing here are more for here and the rest of the world.
What do you suggest to producers here in Hollywood who want to work on Chinese projects? If you have a
well, things have there's a lot more opportunities to do that than there were even a few years ago. There are most of the big Chinese companies have offices here and have executives here that you can go, in Los Angeles and go around from Wanda Group and Alibaba, and Huayi Brothers, Bona, iQIYI, a lot of them where you can go and meet the executives, find out what they're looking for. Everybody's looking for good projects. So if you're a writer or producer who has something that's focused on the Chinese market, there could be opportunity to work with them here. And then, of course, there's no better way to get involved in China than just to go over there and spend some time. It's not hard to meet people in the Chinese film industry. Generally, if you go there and tell people that you're coming from Hollywood, they'll be interested to meet you. And so I've made quite a few trips like that, where I just go over, and the whole point is networking or to explore and present projects. There are also some good film festivals, one of them coming up in a few weeks, the Shanghai Film Festival, which is a place where a lot of people gather, not just from around China, but also around Asia and other parts of the world, to meet and discuss Chinese film projects, finished films, but also films that are in development or being packaged and put together. So that's a really good place to meet people who have a similar interest in doing either films in China or doing co-productions.
And what do you suggest to Chinese filmmakers who want to come to Hollywood?
There are different types of people who come from China to Hollywood. Some are producers, and if they have an established track record, they've made some successful films. There's a lot of interest here in Hollywood for people like that who know how to make movies that work in China. Warner Brothers, for instance, has a partnership in China making Chinese language movies, but most of the studios are doing business with Chinese producers, and a lot of them are looking for projects that they can do there. Now, not everybody has that experience. There are a lot of people who are looking to get started, and that's really different. If you come from China, you have a good education, you speak good Chinese, you speak good English, that's sort of a minimum that you need. It used to be that there were plenty of jobs, but now it's gotten very competitive, and there are a lot of people in that situation. So it really helps to have a strong idea about what you want to do. Is it finance or distribution or development? And then be able to show some experience, some skill in that particular field. And you're competing not only with other Chinese speakers, but also everybody else who wants to find their way into Hollywood. So the other thing is just to be very active and aggressive about networking with people, getting out there. It's all really about meeting people. There are lots of events, and the CAPE and the China Hollywood Society, and places where you can go and meet other people who have that same interest. And that's how I've gotten every opportunity I've had. It's really just to get out there and meet people.
It's all about connections and
absolutely
place to meet people. And Robert, before starting a shooting, how do you get in touch with international collaborators and investors?
Well, raising money, of course, is very important for making a movie. It's one of the hardest parts of it. And it requires a lot of planning, a lot of strategy. Usually when you approach someone about putting money into a movie, you have a very detailed plan about what you're going to do with it, about how you're going to produce, and also how you're going to get the money back to the investor plus a profit. So it requires a lot of upfront work. And also, you really have to think about what the other person is going to want. There are lots of investors, and China has become really well known for having a lot of money these days for movies. There are a lot of Chinese investors who make themselves known here in the US and make it known that they're looking for projects. But just to go to them and say, hey, give me some money, I want to make a movie here. If they don't know you, you're probably not going to get very far. And if you haven't really thought about what they want and asked the questions, what will make this a successful investment for you? For instance, a lot of Chinese investors want to take the Chinese distribution rights for the film. They want to own that. There may be other things. They're looking for particular types of projects. You really have to think about all this and ask the right questions and make the investor understand that you have their interests in mind as well as your own.
Okay, great. And after the shooting, what are you tasked to release the movie, and how do you build your relation with international sales agents, for example, or distributors?
Yeah, you really have to start a project with the marketing and distribution in mind right from the beginning. If you haven't thought all of that through, and many people do make their movies and then try to figure out the distribution and marketing, and that can be a big mistake. You can find out, especially with China, where there's so many rules about what kind of films can be shown, what the content of those movies has to be, whether they can even be imported. You know, there's a lot of rules around that. So you have to have an understanding of that up front. And I start projects by talking to the distributors right at the beginning. What is the market looking for right now? Who are the actors I should think about casting because they're well-liked and they're popular and they're going to help me to raise money for the film. And so usually, and it's also a good opportunity to get an investor excited about your project and to get them to make a commitment. And if a distributor is committed up front to taking your film, that can really help a lot if you think about it. If an investor is looking at a project and there's one that doesn't have any distribution in place and another that already has deals, well, that's a much safer investment. So yeah, I start up front. And then as we get the film finished, of course, there's a lot more work that goes into thinking about the marketing, raising the money to do that marketing and distribution. But hopefully a lot of those issues have been thought through well ahead of time.
And do you have an example just to share with us about a movie and you thought about the distribution before starting the shooting?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm doing that now with a project that I'm setting up. It's a mystery thriller, sort of a moderate budget. And we have the script. I have an investor that's interested. We haven't even started talking to actors yet. But the very next thing we're going to do is figure out who's going to be the foreign sales company. And there are a few of us. I'm working with some partners. We know a lot of the sales companies. We have an idea generally about what they're looking for. But what we want to do is go to them and say, is this a movie that you would like to be involved with? Are these, we might come to them with a list of actors, but we'll also ask them, who are the actors that you think would help to sell this film internationally? And that's an important part of the process, not only about distributing the film down the road, but also it's an important part of the financing process as well. We're looking for information and commitments up front that will help us. We can go take to the investors and the banks and the lenders and show them that this is a movie that's going to be a good bet for them.
Sure. Thank you very much, Robert, for all your reply and your vision. And looking forward to our next meeting here at the Millennium Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Thank you for watching Hollywood Meets China. I am Romy. See you next time.